Okay, so let's continue our discussion on absolute value equation and inequalities, and this time our main focus will be on the inequalities. Okay, so we've already mentioned before that when we are solving an equation that has absolute value, we always find two values of the variable that can satisfy the absolute value. One is a positive value and then the other one is a negative. All right, now in the case of inequalities, I know that there is this explanation here, but I'll just make it I will just make it short for you to better understand. Okay, so when you have an inequality, you always have to solve it two times. You always have to solve the absolute value expression twice. Okay, remember when we had our absolute value equation, let's say absolute value of x, there will be two ways for you to solve for the value of x, right? X is going to be a positive number, or if x is going to be a negative number. Okay, now if you have an absolute value inequality, okay, if you have an absolute value inequality, let's say it's a greater than something, okay, you will have it solved. So if you are looking for the positive value, your inequality stays. Okay, now if you are looking for the negative value, you will have to flip the inequality. That's the simplest explanation that I can give you for solving absolute value inequality. When you are working on the positive value of the absolute value, if you're working on the positive, you keep the inequality, whatever inequality you are given. The moment that you are solving for the negative version, you will have to flip your inequality. Okay, so let's have an example here. So we have the absolute value of 8n is greater than or equal to 24. Okay, so when we are solving for whatever is inside your absolute value, so remember, if you have 8n equals something equals 24, if that was the case, we know that this inside 8n should either be positive 24 or 8n should be equal to negative 24, right? But now that we have an absolute value, okay, now that we have an absolute value, okay, you will have to consider two things. One is if 8n is a positive 24, so for it to be positive, you will retain the inequality. Now, if you are looking for 8n that will be equal to negative 24, then your inequality will need to flip. All right, so what is the value of n on our first inequality? So here you divide by 8, you divide by 8, and so n is going to be greater than or equal to 3. All right, and you can check the solution. So if you have 8 times positive 3, the absolute value of that, is that going to be equal to 24? Definitely, the absolute value of 24 is indeed 24. All right, so now let's take a look at the other side. So we divide also by 8, divide by 8, n is going to be less than or equal to negative 3. So imagine if you put negative 3 in here, so we will have let's say we have 8 times negative 3, that's going to be negative 24. What's the absolute value of negative 24? It is indeed positive 24. Okay, now as you can see here, that's how we will be working on inequalities for absolute value. Whenever you are solving for your variable already that is inside your absolute value expression, for the positive value, keep the inequality. For the negative version of the value, switch your inequality. So why don't you try this next example on your own and try this one out? Go ahead. So as you can see here, again, whatever is inside our absolute value expression, again, as long as the absolute value is by itself, all right? One of them has to be a positive 5. So for the greater than or equal to positive 5, keep the inequality. If it is for the negative 5, then you have to switch the inequality. And then your goal is to isolate your variable. So you have your -4, and then you divide by 2. X will be greater than or equal to positive 1/2, and then the other value of x would be negative 9/2. All right. So let's have an example. This next problem here. A company makes boxes of crackers that should weigh 213 grams. A quality control inspector randomly selects boxes to weigh. Any box that varies from the weight by more than 5 grams is sent back. What is the range of allowable weights for a box of crackers? Okay, so if you will take a look at this particular problem, it says here that the actual weight should be 213, okay? Whether you subtract 5 or whether you add 5 to it, the maximum weight, the weight acceptable is up to 5. That's different from 213, all right? So if you're going to take a look at this, okay, so if the allowed measurement is, it should not be more than, not more than 5 grams, okay? So it cannot be not more than, so it has to be less than or equal to 5 grams, okay? So whatever the weight was, and it has to be plus 5, okay, cannot be more than that. And so what you are, or what you can work on here is, we solve for this inequality. So you will have W plus, I'm sorry, hold on. Let's get that back here. Oops, again, let me make some corrections here, my bad. I think I read my problem wrong. Okay, sorry about that. So again, the weight should be at around 213. So whatever weight of the box, so whatever is the weight, the original weight is 213. It should not be more than 5. The difference between the weight of any box and the required weight, which is 213. So we have to remember that this needs to be an absolute value. Okay, so how can we find what are the acceptable weights without actually working on your inequality here and the absolute value? You know that you can be from, if 5 less than, if you subtract 5 from 213, you're looking at 208 grams. If you add 5 to 213, that's 218 grams, right? So basically, that's what you know. But if you're going to solve it, if you're going to show your solution, it's going to be this way. So you will have the weight minus 213. The acceptable is 5. And then if you have the weight minus 213, must be greater than negative 5, okay? So in this case, we solve for W. So if you add 213 on both sides, W should be less than, the weight should be less than 218, okay? And if we add 213 on this side, the acceptable weight is greater than 208. So the acceptable weights for it to be still allowed will be from 208 until 218, okay? Sorry for the confusion. So to summarize our lesson, you can solve absolute value equations and inequality by first isolating the absolute value expression. We've mentioned that. And then you can write equivalent pair of equations or inequalities and solve them individually, one with a positive answer and then another one will be a negative value. All right.